If you've been an athlete, or almost in any activity that has any physicality at all, you know that injuries are a part of all sporting events, including the Olympics. For example, in 1976, in Montreal, as some of you might recall, Japanese gymnast Shun Fujimoto broke his kneecap during the floor gymnastics exercise, but not wanting his teammates to worry, he didn't say anything about what had happened. And then, in an incredible display of courage, he went on to compete in both the side horse and did an excellent routine from the rings. And on the dismount from the rings, he dislocated that same injured knee. His heroic efforts won his country the gold medal in the team competition. Even fierce competitors get injured. John Gilbert was left in a wheelchair after a surgery when he was 9 years old, leaving him paralyzed. It took years, he said, to adjust to that manner of life from a chair, living through times and periods of great depression and despair. The turning point came one day when they happened to be at a basketball game, and at the end of the game, they were on the court, and his mom sat down at the three-point line and had one of the basketballs in her hand and hurled it toward the hoop, making it with a swish. She turned, he said, surprised that had happened. But then she said to her son, "If I can make it sitting on the ground, you can play basketball sitting in a chair too." And he did. John Gilbert is on the U.S. Paralympic basketball team competing in Rio beginning just a couple days from now in the Paralympics. I know you all thought the Olympics were over and my illustrations would be done from the Olympics. Just in time. In sports as in life, injuries occur. And I hate to admit it, injuries occur at church too. I'm thinking of members who have taken a misstep off the platform. These are sort of strange, short little stairs, and from time to time, somebody takes a spill off the platform or catches their foot, as someone did last week, on the uneven pavement out in front of our building on the sidewalk, or cars collide in the parking lot. If only we were limited to physical injuries when we came to church, our problems would probably be fairly minimal, but there's a whole list of other types of injuries that can take place. Probably the most significant amount of injuries are not physical injuries. You know, angry words, hurt feelings, money issues, troubles associated with making any kind of change at all. The question I've gotten the most in the last few weeks is, are we ever going back to the traditional version of the Lord's Prayer? Harsh accusations, snarky comments, gossip, jealous, misguided romantic fantasies, ego needs, manipulations, opinions about everything or anything, major feelings about minor things, criticisms of staff or volunteers, power struggles, arguments about what group can use the church building, all kinds of things that can go on. Someone's too bossy, someone's too loud, someone's too quiet, someone's too mousy, you get the idea. It can go in all kinds of directions, can't it? And suddenly the list of injuries gets quite long, even in the church. Don't get me wrong, these are not minor things. These are real injuries. These are things that require healing, and they leave good people feeling wounded, sometimes wounded in such a way they're redshirted for weeks or months or decades. And sometimes people are redshirted from the life of the church for the rest of their lives. So my subject for this series, this last in the series, is that believers with a race for the goal mindset are to expect, to prepare for, and recover from injury. We can't become competitors in the Olympics in a 6-week training, and I don't think we can probably be competitive either in our spiritual life with just simple 6 weeks, but there's some, I think, helpful things for us to think about, and necessary things to think about in our spiritual life as we move forward in trying to live into the power of the way of Jesus. Each week I shared some practical tips. Here's the review. If you've been here over the weeks, you'll know the answer. So, believers with a race for the gold mindset, in the first week, remember the witnesses. All in Hebrews 11, 12, and parts of 13 we've been reading. Remember the witnesses. We familiarize ourselves with some saint from the past of the church to encourage our journey. Did you pick somebody? I only know one who did, for sure. Second Sunday, believers with a race for the goal mindset remove any hindrances. So we lessen distractions. We put off the weight of behaviors and attitudes that keep us limited in our progress. How's that going? Third week, believers with a race for the goal mindset run with perseverance. They expect that their calling to be God's children is going to include difficulties. They don't give up the first time they feel hungry or thirsty or winded or they have a cramp. They figure it out and move forward. Sunday 4, believers with a race for the goal mindset, race for the goal, keeping their eyes on Jesus. They keep their eyes on the prize. They train their minds and they return repeatedly to Christ. The fifth Sunday last week, believers with a race for the goal mindset respect and accept discipline. They know that a loving God won't let them get away with inappropriate behaviors. The Scriptures helps to train us in the matter of the way of life that is the way of Jesus. And if there's a conflict with our wills, we are always invited to submit our wills to God's. So do you remember? Remember the witnesses, remove any hindrances, run with perseverance, reach for the goal with your eyes on Jesus, respect and accept divine discipline. And now in our passage, that last line that I read in our second reading from Hebrews 12 and 13, you have a Bible in front of you. You can look at those as well. We've been using some version of the New Living and the NIV, the NRSV, and the Message in all of our translations over this series, but this is one from the New Living. So take a new grip on your tired hands and stand firm on your shaky legs. Mark out a straight path for your feet. Then those who follow you, though they are weak and lame, will not stumble and fall because they will become strong. That last verse, 13, is rendered differently in different verses. In the New American Standard, it says, "Therefore strengthen the hands that are weak and the knees that are feeble, and make straight paths for your feet, so the limb that is lame may not be put out of joint, but rather be healed." So the limb that is lame will not be put out of joint, but will be healed. The Message, I always love the Message for its fun way of translating it. So don't sit on your hands. We're Lutherans. We always sit on our hands. Don't sit on your hands. No more dragging your feet. Clear the path for the long-distance runners so no one will trip and fall and no one will step in a hole and sprain an ankle. Help each other out and run for it. Great line. Run for it. So the idea here, of course, and our last idea in this series, number 6, is that believers with a race for the goal mindset prepare for, expect, and recover from injuries. After an affliction of some kind, they don't remain incapacitated forever. That's part of what we prepare for. They recover from their injuries. It's part of the game. We have basketball players in here and soccer players in here, and you prepare in advance to keep injuries at bay. How do you do that? Well, if you know much about getting in shape, you try to strengthen your core so that you're not inadvertently putting too much stress or strain on any particular joint, say like an ankle joint, because you're trying to hold all of your weight on that because your core is not ready enough. You prepare by making sure that your body is ready. Think about a baseball player. A pitcher inadvertently hits a batter on the hand with a pitch. The trainers remove them from play, right? They take him inside the dugout and they take him inside the building and they x-ray the hand to make sure there's nothing more serious going on. Or a football player, quarterback gets blindsided and sort of wobbly gets up. They pull the quarterback off. They make sure that there's no concussion, nothing more serious. But the bottom line is to have players who heal properly and in time to get the athlete back on the field. We don't have anything like that in the church, do we? Oftentimes we just let people play hurt, right? There's no sense of getting them out there and getting them off the field, and in order to recuperate and recover, we just keep pushing them forward. And that's why oftentimes our volunteers just burn out, don't they? They get hurt. We have that in council members. Sometimes there's conflicts, of course, and people see the inner workings, and they leave council, and they just sort of drift away. Just difficult. A leader in the church disappointing you shouldn't have meant you stopped attending church 35 years ago, and that your children and grandchildren copied that particular pattern and example, and they missed out on one of the best things in the life of faith. Whatever the pain involved in an incident certainly doesn't merit such a great price as that. The goal is to get back into the race, not to stay on the sidelines forever. So you had a bad mix of personalities on a particular committee. We never have that around here. So you dreaded going to the committee, right? You dreaded it. And then you began to make up reasons that you didn't want to go that had nothing to do with the fact that you just felt uncomfortable. And it can happen. And granted, it's not a pleasant experience, but to forfeit using your God-given gifts for 10 years or 20 years and counting, that's not a good result. That's not running the race. That's not paying attention to the injury and getting back in the way. Maybe you experienced an injury of the one who felt hypocritical when she was teaching teenagers. I am not speaking to anyone in the crowd. I know somebody always comes out and says, you were talking about me, weren't you? No, this is a straw person. I'm going to say a she, but it is not a she. It's just an example. Because she knew that the Christianity, the principles that she was teaching weren't things that she was fully living up to. And finally, in the midst of such duplicity, it got the best of her. She resigns. She discovered that the injuries aren't always from others, right? Sometimes the injuries are from self-inflicted wounds. But now she misses the joy of being around those kids, being around the vibrancy of their life and faith, being around the importance of their questions. And who can't relate to that? I mean, who among you, well, this is a dangerous question, isn't it? Because we'll find all the narcissists all at once. Who among you doesn't feel hypocritical? And these are some pretty high ideals, aren't they? And living into them is no rocket trajectory. We are more like butterflies than rockets. Unless sometimes we explode, that does happen too, but more often than not, it's sort of like a graph following the stock market. It's up, it's down, it's up, it's down. You just never know. And sometimes because of that, we remove ourselves from that, and our opinion becomes stronger than God's grace. And that's a tragedy. Now, if believers with a race for the goal mindset expect and plan for and recover from injuries, what are we supposed to do? So I hinted at the first point already. I got it out of order. Preventive medicine is always the best, isn't it? Be practiced and strong, and serious injury will be lessened. We know that. Injuries happen. It's not like you can prevent every injury. Have you ever been envious of the maturity of another person of faith? Who you're around them and you go, wow, they're a spiritual giant, and I'm like puny. It's terrible. How do you think they got that way? You think it just happened because their DNA was right? You know, God just gave them the right spiritual DNA. So far, they haven't found spiritual DNA, by the way. DNA, like physicality, is often things that we work into our lives, staying in shape. They worked on the core practices. I was going to show the clip, we don't have time, of the Karate Kid. Remember it? What was his first activity? Go out and wax my car. Put the wax on, put the wax off. Wax on, wax off. So he gets into the competition. What's he supposed to do to defend himself? Wax on, wax off. Yeah. Preventive medicine is always practice your faith. Right? I mean, I know. I'm not that smart. I'm just telling you just the core stuff. Just practice your faith. Become strong in the core activities. You'll be amazed at the result. Second, if injury does occur, or when the injury occurs, what was it that landed you on the disabled list? Now what precisely happened? Assess it. Before you start mythologizing the other person and using dualistic thinking and making them the worst possible person that ever existed, really, don't generalize, don't over-exaggerate, don't mythologize your pain and your hurt. Really assess it. What really happened? What was really at the heart of it? If you can't figure it out on your own, talk to some trusted folks around you. Not in a gossip way, but in terms of trying to help you figure out, how do I get back into the game? Name it for what it was. Don't let it become bigger than it needs to be. Don't give it more power than it deserves. If it felt like a slight from someone, don't demonize the whole for one person. We certainly have lost people to this church because they get in a tiff with somebody, myself or someone else, and they demonize the whole. If someone didn't notice something that you did, was overlooked, lovingly bring it to their attention. More often than not, your friends in your church, the people who have stake in spiritual journeying together, missed it because of distractions in their own lives. Extend the benefit of the doubt and be forgiving. Get back in the game. Third, assess how serious the injury really is. Now, I mean, The slight's one thing, but there are more serious things, aren't there? And determine how long it will take for you to remain red-shirted, meaning out of play, not able to play. Can it be handled in a normal course? Or, my fourth point, does the injury require some program of rehabilitation? All through the series, I've given you simple strengthening exercises for rehabilitating. What were they? Do you remember them? Think about some of the saints that you know through the ages, people who've experienced things like you have or worse than you have, and look into their lives and see what's important about how they did it. Have you done that? Strive against the hindrances, the temptations. You know what they are. As I always say, we call for the general confession, and you start confessing the same things every week. That's the stuff that you're supposed to start taking on. It's usually not the big things, because the big things we're blind to. It's the little stuff. Begin to eliminate those little things, making spiritual priorities more important. Have you done that? Train yourself to make Christ your first thought when you're rising and your last thought when you go to bed. Put him before your eyes at that point in the day to help you remember that in key decisions that you'll ask that question, what would Jesus do? Read the book In His Steps, the book that birthed that movement more than 100 years ago. Respect the divine discipline. Accept and seek accountability. How many of you have spiritual accountability in your life? I would imagine that very few of us do. It's something you really have to seek out. It's something you really have to make a priority. Do you have spiritual accountability in your life for moving forward in the life of faith? Realize that rehabilitation, like running the race, isn't necessarily easy. It could be hurtful. How many of you have gone to physical therapy? Was it fun? No. Did it help? Yes. Practice putting the good of the church ahead of any personal gain. In other words, your community needs the investment of individuals to keep its integrity moving forward. And over again, tell yourself, this is something I can do, especially when I recall the truth of God's specialty of helping and healing broken people. That's what God is about. It's not a whole lot more complicated than that. That is, if you still have a desire to race for the goal, and that sometimes is at the heart of the matter, isn't it? The very beginning issue of the will. The bottom line, though, is how will you be more Christ-like as a result of your race of faith, which this week was don't let injury get in the way of your walk of faith. Competing the divine mission, Jesus wasn't hindered by the obstacles in his way, even the difficulty. Hebrews 12 talks about that. Put differently, it's to be doers of the word and not just hearers of it. I mean, how many of us come week after week after week, but it doesn't really generate any change in us? It doesn't really get any traction in the Tuesday morning meeting or the Wednesday morning opportunity when you walk up to the water cooler and that person also walks up. It needs to begin to get some traction in those kind of areas. Otherwise, we're just hearing these words but not doing the words. Will they be noticed by the improvement in the spiritual program, the rehabilitation you're trying to put into your life? What does running the race, striving for the goal look like? It's those 6 things we talked about before. Can you recall them? I have done copious repetitions over these weeks. I can't even say them myself again. If you can't remember the points, go back to Hebrews 12, 1 to 13. That's the heart of where this series has come from. Tell God in your prayers, you know, it's that kind of person that I really want to be. It's that kind of person that your church needs you to be. It's that kind of person who knows the power of living in the way of Jesus. Amen.